May I have your attention, please? This tape is on Byzantine architecture. Put in the first slide, please. There actually is very little difference between early Christian art and Byzantine art. Now, if we remember history, we know that the Christian religion was not recognized until the 4th century, in the 300s, with the age of Constantine. And then the Roman Empire was divided finally into two areas, the East and the Western division. And Constantine set up his capital in Constantinople, in the eastern side, and we must realize that this is where the origins of the Christian religion began, more with an Asiatic or an Oriental background. There is very little, with the exception of the catacomb paintings, that remains of the early Christian art. Very little sculpture, absolutely no pieces of architecture before the 5th century. But we have two styles of Byzantine architecture, that was influenced more by the Greco-Roman plan of the basilica, of the rectangular church, that fostered more in the Italian peninsula, and the round or the many-sided or octagonal structured church that was based on the Eastern or Byzantine influence. The Byzantine, B-Y-Z-A-N-T-I-N-E, seemed sort of opposed to the rationalization of the Greco-Roman type of art. The Byzantine offered an Oriental mysticism and symbolism in place of the Hellenic tradition of formalism, logic, and idealization according to natural observation. This was the great change. Now, just in that statement, you have an idea of the Oriental mysticism and symbolism opposed to a traditional or natural observation of objects. So you have a much more enriched type art. One seems very static, staid, where the other has sort of a curvy pattern to it. The original churches, a few of them, based on this octagonal design, really were a combination of the more pagan Roman baths, which encircled large areas, and a type of building, the round drum structure with a dome, that was the influence of the Asiatic. Slide, please. Byzantine art really did not establish its roots until the reign of Justinian, 527 to 565 AD. Now, actually, most of the structures at this time in Constantinople were destroyed in the Turkish wars. And it is sort of ironic that our best structures of this period, of the early Byzantine style, are in Ravenna, in Italy, on the Adriatic, or on the eastern side of Italy. Ravenna had been a capital since 402 of the Roman Empire. It was a naval station. And at the time of the arrival of Justinian and his Empress Theodora on a visit to Ravenna, commemorating this, some of the most beautiful of the mosaics within the interior of this church, San Vitale, were commissioned to commemorate this visit. It was one of the first ideas of portraiture, 6th century portraiture. You can imagine having your emperor staring down at you from the interior of this church. The mosaics we will see a little of today, but we will save them for the next lecture when we analyze the Byzantine art of painting, decorative arts, smaller pieces of sculpture. This lecture is basically to analyze the structures that house these objects. It is a little difficult to separate these two because the beauty, the integration of the art with the architecture is so superb in these Byzantine churches that it is hard to make a break or distinction between the two. The exterior of the church forms sort of a shell to house these beautiful treasures. The Romans used a mosaic as a pattern as early as in Pompeii, using natural stones and different colorings as floor patterns, as sort of wall surface decoration. But in the age of Justinian, they used the small bits of glass, brightly colored, set into mortar or grout, as it was called, in a beautiful pattern that formed magnificent wall coverings of the interiors of these churches. San Vitale was built between 526 and 547 AD. It is, again, the sort of multi-sided round temple type structure with the central dome and little compartments jutting out from the exterior wall. Slide, please. The atrium, or the entrance, is sort of a peculiar off-sided arrangement. The reason which is not known, because the ground was certainly flat enough that it didn't cause the sort of long oval paper clip type entrance down at the bottom in this floor plan. But in the plan we see where it is a circular central dome with an outer ambulatory for walking, and then the apse or the nave end is sort of a little jutting thing out one end of it that forms a slightly elongated effect. Most of the mosaics are within the apse end, as we see in this little lozenge type structure going off to the upper right. Slide, please. Looking at the exterior, we see a very plain brick church. The early Byzantine churches were very unadorned on the outside. This was to give the feeling, as you left this very humble structure, sort of a worldly, earthy look to it, that as you would enter the church with its magnificence and display of mosaics and glittering altarpieces in gold, that you would almost be like entering the kingdom of heaven. The effect from the earthly, from the outside, to the heavenly on the inside was very definitely planned in such a way. Slide, please. As you look toward the altar end of the church in a black and white photograph, you see what a difference the splendor of the inside is in contrast to the exterior. Slide, please. And in a color picture, these glittering mosaics with each little surface of the tesserae, or each little individual square stone of brilliantly colored glass, reflecting light in many different directions. The color still as strong today as it was in the 6th century. The Byzantine influence is very definitely seen when we will look closely at these with the linear, sort of curving, linear, rich, stylized effect of the drawings that are made within the mosaics. Slide, please. The arch principle was used, much as it was in the Roman times, basically to be able to span greater spaces. It also forms this more curvy type design rather than the lintel construction, which is sort of harsh and rigid. You have a greater feeling of flow from one area to the other. The design has a greater ease in looking at it. The columns were all highly decorated in different marbles, different surface treatments to just enrich the pattern of the interior of the church. Slide, please. In most of the early Byzantine patterns, you see very little geometric work or perpendicular horizontal type designs. On the top of this column, you have a design, sort of a serpentine effect, based on a vine twisting type thing that was used again and again in most Byzantine art. like the little curving pattern that circles the entablature of each of the columns, and then within this sort of two-dimensional relief work, decorating the surface of the column itself. In the interior of the arches, all were constantly covered with these mosaics in rich patterns, sometimes in just geometric designs. Slide, please. Looking at the altar end of San Vitale. Now, the two mosaics are on either side that depict the Emperor Justinian and his Empress Theodora with their retinue, and we'll see these in the next lecture. Slide, please. As with most of the Byzantine effect, as I said, it presented a symbolism presenting the features of Christianity. Most of these are then very linear patterns against a flat gold background. They create very little space, or the illusion of space, but it is a flat surface that is decorated with a very rich design. Slide, please. On the grounds with San Vitale is an absolute gem of Byzantine architecture. And this is the tomb, actually, a little chapel and a tomb of Galla and Placidia, a husband and wife that were rulers in the Ravenna area. It's a very simple structure based on a Greek cross design, with the two arms of equal length, the central core, and this time instead of a round dome, because this is a very small space, possibly 30 feet across from the widest part of the arms. You have a central square dome that rises up with a very simple clay-tiled roof. But as you enter the door into a sort of a dark, dim interior that's lighted through the few windows pierced through the openings that are covered with a thin sheet of alabaster, the beauty of the interior, covered solid in mosaics, is sort of startling, especially when you can get slides that have artificial lighting that allow you to see the beauty and the intricacy of the mosaics. Slide, please. In each of the four arms, and then in the taller sections that finally end up into a rounded dome within that square structure, you have this rich dark blue that sort of ties all things together. And different symbolic things is the figure of Christ, the purity of the fire, and then in the cabinet over on the far left you have the four books of the gospel. In each of the different little meanings, Christ the shepherd is portrayed. Stag, the stag, the symbol of Christ, and also the peacock that you will see, a symbol of eternity. Slide, please. The walls are fairly thick, as you see in perspective, the depth of the window, and then that pale little beige area, the square, is a sheet of alabaster carved very, very thin that admits a very warm, glowing light into the interior. The altar is directly beneath this mosaic, and then the two sarcophagi are placed in the opposite ends of the transept, or of the cross. The pattern on the ceiling is a very rich design, just based on a flower motif. And then bordering the arches is a very intricate geometric perspective type design based on a Greek key motif. Slide, please. The Orthodox baptistry, also in Ravenna, is a beautiful octagonal shaped building that is also covered with mosaics. Slide, please. The use of the arches, the patterns of the arches, the embellishments of the different colors of stone that is used, makes all of the Byzantine interiors very rich and colorful. Slide, please. This is the dome of the baptistry showing the baptism of Christ. The baptistry in most of the churches was a separate building, as was the bell tower, or campanile as it is called. Slide, please. This was an earlier church that was built near the Bosphorus Sea, near Constantinople, and again shows the use of the circular motif. Although this was not the most functional plan for the Christian religion, for their ceremonies, the influence of the Eastern or Oriental motifs dominated the plans for many centuries. The basilica plan, or the rectangular shaped plan that was more predominant in Italy, was actually a much more functional one that we will see in a later style called Romanesque. Slide, please. We will see now just different versions of the Byzantine church. And we'll see the similarity from the exterior views. Later on, the exterior did get a little more ornate, a little more carefully contrived. But basically, you have a central dome that was built on a cylinder with a covering of a dome. Materials were a little difficult to come by. This is why I think possibly in some of the areas they resorted to this plan. The brick was plentiful and used around on the Italian peninsula, but the old basilica type, which used timber for the roof, was much more difficult to obtain. Slide, please. In the 6th and 7th centuries, the churches did become more ornate. Now, most of the type of design was based on the Roman pagan structures, not so much on the temples, because we must really sort of analyze the difference of the two religions. With the Greek and the Roman temple, the exterior was the most beautiful thing, with the interior a very simple space, because most of the people saw only the exterior of the building. With the Christian religion, it was reversed. The exterior became the very simple thing, and the interior became the rich part. Slide, please. Then we have really a tremendous break in architecture, the first golden age of the Byzantine. And this is a photograph of Santa Sophia in Constantinople, or now called Istanbul. Santa Sophia was built between 532 and 537. It is basically, again, the central dome with two half-dome alcoves on either side, which gives a feeling in floor plan of a long oval nave, or almost like the old-style Byzantine church that has been split down the middle, separated, and another dome put in between. The minarets were an 18th century addition, because this is one of the few churches that has survived many, many religions. It was built first as a Byzantine Christian church. Then, as the Turks overran the country, it was turned into a mosque, and many of the beautiful mosaics on the interior were whitewashed or plastered over, and in just recent years are they being restored to their full beauty. And then it became a mosque, and then it is now just a national shrine with no services of any religion in it. But the break in architecture came where, in the building of this church, the support of the dome rested on the four corners or four pillars, which gave no function to the interior space between the pillars. As a result, many more windows were allowed to be placed within these side walls, which were just sort of shielding functional covered walls, and this gave a much more light, beautiful interior space to the inside. Slide, please. Santa Sophia, from the nave, from the floor to the top of the dome, is 184 feet tall, or similar to an 18-story building. The dome's diameter is approximately at the top of the base of the square, 112 feet. It is a tremendous volume of space, and as you can see the arch as the basic structure here going down to the 4 pillars on the corner that support the whole dome, all the little windows that then can be cut into that screening wall in between this area. Slide, please. Also, as the dome was built, many of these little windows that form things were pierced in to form a beautiful pattern that almost sets up a crown-like appearance to the interior of the church, which becomes very startling. Slide, please. You see it in floor plan. The atrium, or the lower section here, was removed many years ago by the Turks. Then as you enter through the church, you have a feeling of a long nave, or an extended piece, which actually belies the appearance that the floor plan does form almost a square. Slide, please. And the interior of Santa Sophia. This is in Istanbul. Slide, please. There was nothing later built in the Byzantine period that ever excelled the Santa Sophia. It was the climax of the beautiful Byzantine churches. St. Mark's, that was built in the 11th century in Venice, is much richer on the interior, but certainly is not architecturally as exciting. Slide, please. Slide, please. Some of the other Italian churches, this is St. Apollinare Nuovo, was built in the 6th century, but on the basilica plan, and it's pretty much the way it looked when it was built in the 6th century. The campanile, or the bell tower, was a medieval addition to the church. It is hard to distinguish this from later Romanesque style, because the floor plan and the basic structure of the tall nave with the 2 side aisles is very characteristic of the Romanesque period of architecture. Except where Romanesque, they designed the exterior of the building. In St. Apollinare, you have a feeling that it is just a shell that houses the interior of the church. It is a plain brick church with wood timber roof, tile on the roof. Slide, please. The old atrium, or the entranceway, was taken off. The small addition was later added. But you have just a long box structure of the church. There's no feeling of facade or entrance to the church at all. You can come in any door, because the interior is the important part of this early Christian or Byzantine church. Slide, please. It is a very simple structure, almost what you would call provincial. Again, the side walls are supported by the row of columns. You have the long nave, or the aisle, the transfer from the entrance up to the apse end. You have decorative mosaics within the arches on the side walls, medallions of the different saints lining the side walls. But really everything is concentrated in the apse end in the beautiful mosaic of St. Apollinare with the 12 sheep depicting the apostles. Slide, please. And the really beautiful circular medallion of the cross. Slide, please. That's seen in this startling view is, I think, very beautiful. Slide, please. Another church, St. Apollinare in Classe, is a much more simple structure, still Byzantine. We see a beautiful coffered ceiling. A coffered ceiling is a false area underneath the triangular arches that are pediments that hold up the roof. And then it is an intricate, different layered work in different geometric sections. It is basically the same design as St. Apollinare Nuovo, but we have a beautiful frieze of mosaics that we will look at later of the saints and the virgins as they proceed up toward the altar end of the church. Obviously, the apse was to have a mosaic at one time that was never completed. Slide, please. Slide, please. Slide, please. These are other types of Byzantine churches, just variations on the same theme. This one looking a little peculiar with these sort of chimney pot domes. Slide, please. And some of them that got larger and more elaborate. Slide, please. Most of them were based on the octagonal motif, or possibly the Greek cross, where the corners were filled with anterooms. Slide, please. And toward the later part, you got decoration on the outside that will be used again in the Romanesque style of architecture. Based on the dome principle, or the arch principle, that supported a lot of space. Slide, please. Slide, please. Slide, please. A very late Byzantine church, but one of the most beautiful, I think basically because of its setting, is St. Mark's in Venice. This church was begun in the 11th century, around 1063. It's a fairly large one. It was built on the site of an earlier wooden Byzantine church and houses the tomb of St. Mark, the patron saint of Venice. Venice itself is a shimmering city that was highly influenced by the East, much more so just by its position than the western part of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire finally gave up the ghost around the 5th century, 467, when it could no longer afford or support the classical mode of civilization. Then the Christian empire was centered in Constantinople with these outposts along the Italian coast. Venice was built in the marshes of the Aegean Sea. Pilings were driven down into the ground, the marshy substance. And then as the ground was pulled away, the water flooded, so that it is a city of streets of canals and water, where boat transportation is the method of getting from one area to another. They have small alleyways today, bridges that go across the canals, but there are no bicycles or no automobiles in the whole city of Venice. You leave your car at the parking garage, and then you cross over, or you go out of the garage or out of the train station, climb into a gondola, and then off to your hotel. The central part of the city centers around this beautiful square that is then enclosed sort of almost in a rectangle around the facade of the cathedral. It is built in a beautiful Byzantine style with a central dome and then 4 smaller domes situated over the 4 corners. It is highly decorated on the exterior with mosaics and the little lunettes that cover the different doorways that enter into the atrium or the entry hall before you enter the church proper. This church is so integrated with its beauty of art and architecture that it's really hard to isolate the Byzantine mosaics that cover the entire surface of the interior of the church. Slide, please. The whole square is thronged with people milling about during the day, the business activities, at night throughout the restaurants and cafes that circle around the square. The Doge Palace, or the home of the Duke, which is built on sort of a Moorish type of architecture, is situated directly to the right of the facade of the cathedral. The colors are rich. All the columns that sort of circle in the two rows around the portals, each of a different type marble, each of a different type design. Slide, please. And the huge domes that are copper covered over wooden timber structure almost look like sort of turbaned hats that sit up on top of the round brick base of the domes. Slide, please. So I've said the interior covered over a long period of time. In fact, some of the mosaics were done as late as the 17th century. Tell the complete story of Christ in different episodes from his life. And all of them are in beautiful, sort of curvy, linear pattern design of figures that stand out in bold, rich colors against a beautiful gold background that just shimmers in the dim light of the interior of the church. Slide, please. These mosaics are rich in pattern, beautiful, bold effect, where there's a nice, crisp edge to the objects and to the figures. Slide, please. In the entryway, as you've entered from the left into this anteroom, and then you go up the steps, as you see there in the center part of the photograph, into the main body of the church. Even these small domes over the portals, all covered in these gold mosaics. Slide, please. And then looking toward the end altar, the main altar, which is in the transept of the near the main dome, you get sort of the full beauty. Although this has a tremendous amount of artificial lighting on it, the interior of the church is much, much dimmer than this in normal times, and also usually crowded with tourists or sightseers or worshipers. The floor also is in a mosaic pattern, not of the glass mosaics, but of stone mosaics, much like in Roman times. And with the flooding of Venice each year, sometimes gets covered over with water. Many times the cathedral may be 2 feet deep in water. So they have a subflooring, or an overflooring, I should say, of wood that is built up above this surface. Slide, please. The altarpiece that we will see, the altar of gold, where they embellished all the designs with pearls and semi-precious stones and precious stones, is behind the main altar as you see it here. The richness of all the decoration and of the beauty fits so beautifully together to make this one homogeneous piece of beautiful Byzantine architecture and art. Slide, please. This is approximately how you see it during the daytime with the amount of lighting that normally comes into the church. Slide, please. Slide, please. Slide, please. The overall effect of the mosaics in St. Mark's are so overwhelming that you very seldom get down to the details of the simple designs within each panel. The mosaics in Ravenna, especially at San Vitale, are much more important, isolated, than the overall effect that they give to the church. Slide, please. A much later addition of a rose window. Slide, please. The pulpit. usually located toward the center of the church. Notice the different colored marbles used in the columns supporting the base of the pulpit. Slide, please. Slide, please. The baptistry, which in this case is situated to the right of the main nave of the church, but within the same building. Slide, please. Slide, please. Slide, please. And a beautiful photograph, again, of the facade during the winter time when the piazza is flooded. You'll notice the people walking across sort of a board plank there at the far end. The campanile, which was once a wooden structure, burned in the 17th century and was replaced by the large brick column you see rising to the right of the photograph in the 18th century. Slide, please. Clear the machine.
For the review, we will start back again with the early Egyptian. We basically divide our areas into three different parts: the architecture, the sculpture, and the decorative arts. In the Egyptian art, we had just the pyramids, we had the early step pyramids, and then the larger pyramids. We had some of the temples, which were built just on post and lintel form of construction. Slide. The Egyptian, the sculpture, was to emphasize the life of the pharaoh. Most of it was for funerary sculpture and giving replicas of the pharaoh for the ka to rest in. Slide. And also most of the interior paintings or decorative arts that we have are from tomb decorations. Slide, please. In the Mesopotamian, we did not have much. There's nothing left of the architecture itself. A few of the glazed brick panel entry walls, but mostly large man and beast combination, showing a great force. They were a very violent people, but in their decoration, it's very delicately done. Slide. And then you have the Gadbois, or the praying Gadbois, where you have the crossed hands, and you have the idols with the large eyes that were the sort of the openings to the soul. The Gadbois was the priest. Slide. And then you have the really terrific stories, the anecdotes of the different happenings of the battles of the leaders, and these were done in low limestone relief carving. Slide, please. In the Aegean culture, the two types of architecture, we had the palace at Minos, and it's very simple construction, beautifully done, lots of sort of labyrinth type rooms, but in its supports, one distinctive thing is a column order of a wooden tapered column, smaller at the base, a little bit larger at the top, with sort of like a pillow or a mushroom cap. These were painted brilliant colors, oranges and blues. And you also had the beehive tombs, where the large blocks were built in a circular motif in an elliptical cone shape. Slide.